Between where you live and where you've been, there is a town. It lies along the highway and off the beaten path. It's in the middle of a forest and in the middle of a desert. It's on the shore of a lake and along a raging river. It's surrounded by mountains and on the edge of a deadly cliff. If you're looking for it, you'll never find it. But if you're lost, it'll appear on your path. The town is Raven's Pass, and you might never leave. Chapter 1. The Villagers. Though it was early afternoon, the sky was as dark as midnight and full of thick, low gray clouds. The rain fell across the village's main street. It was hardly a street at all, really, mostly dirt and gravel, and far too much mud. The villagers stomped through the mud. They carried whatever weapons they could find: pitchforks, garden hose, ropes, and chains. Several people carried torches, but in the gusting wind and violent rain, the flames didn't stay lit. The crowd marched to the new city hall. The building wasn't even finished yet. Raven's Pass had only been founded a few days before, and already it was in grave danger. They reached the new stone foundation. The cellar had been dug. It had been lined with great rocks from the riverbed at the edge of the new town. The middle of the cellar was still uncovered by the main floor. Really, it was little more than a great big hole in the ground, and inside it stood a woman. She watched the crowd approach. They'd come for her, she knew, but she was not afraid. In her hands she held a glowing ball. No one remembered what it was made of, glass or stone, or something else entirely. But it didn't matter that no one remembered, because really, the ball was made of raw, dark power. The woman held the sphere up over her head as the villagers approached. Then she spoke a dark, deep incantation. The villagers heard her, even over the crashing thunder and gusting winds. They stopped to watch. Their lanterns flickered and went out. The few torches that had survived this long fizzled and smoked. The skies opened with a great thunderous boom. Lightning burst across the sky, and rain fell in sheets. The witch, with the glowing orb still in her palms, rose from the sunken earth and floated slowly toward the crowd. They screamed. They ran in every direction. Most didn't make it far. They tripped. They slid in the muddy street. They dodged falling trees in the storm and strikes of lightning. One woman still stood, and she faced the witch. Her pitchfork had broken, and she held the long handle in front of her. "How dare you!" the witch exclaimed. She landed before the woman standing alone. "You cannot begin to understand my power," the witch said. She lifted the orb and it glowed even brighter. The witch began to chant again, but as she opened her mouth, a bolt of lightning slammed down from the heavens. It connected with the orb, knocking the witch back into the cellar, into the gathered mud and water from the storm. She sank quickly. The clouds parted. The storm stopped. The villagers who could still stand ran to the edge of the cellar and looked in. "We must work quickly," said the woman who had faced the witch. "We must finish the building now, on top of the witch, before she wakes." And so they did. The villagers worked all night and through the next day and the next, until Raven's Pass City Hall was finished. They all vowed never to let another soul enter that basement. No one thought Raven's Pass would be founded through such tragedy. But the surviving villagers, though they were tired, cheered for the woman who had stood up to that witch. and that day they honored her. They gave her a job that would let her watch over the children of Raven's Pass. Chapter 2. City Hall. "That's the most ridiculous story I've ever heard," said Gus Jerome. He sat on the top rung of the monkey bars in Raven's Pass's only playground. Since the playground sat right on the edge of the cemetery, most kids didn't go near it. Gus had listened carefully to his friend Hank's story about the witch, trapped for centuries in the basement of Raven's Pass's City Hall. It was no coincidence, of course, that the next day Gus and Hank's 6th grade class would be going on a field trip to City Hall themselves. For years, City Hall hadn't been open to the public, but the city had recently decided to start inviting school field trips. Hank and Gus's class would be the first group of people allowed into the building in hundreds of years. "You don't have to believe me," Hank said. He swung lazily between two bars. Gus rolled his eyes, but he laughed. "Second of all," he said, "Ms. Freckle is going to be watching you like a hawk. Remember the trouble you caused on the trip to the ketchup factory?" "That wasn't my fault," Hank protested, stomping his feet in the sand. "How was I supposed to know that Brittany Wilder was standing under the ketchup chute?" "Tell it to Ms. Freckle," Gus said. "Either way, she won't let you out of her sight at City Hall tomorrow. You won't make it near the cellar door." "That's why you have to help me," Hank said. "If you cause a distraction—" Gus shook his head and waved his hand. "No," he said firmly. "No way. I am not helping you with this. It's stupid." "Come on," Hank said. "I'll tell you what. I'll give you—" Gus looked down at his friend, who was sneering up at him. He obviously had a good offer planned. Gus swung down and dropped to the sand. He stood in front of Hank in the middle of the monkey bars. "Okay, what?" Gus said. "The Sword of Kalia," Hank said. "It's yours, if you help me tomorrow." Hank," Gus said, turning around and ducking out of the monkey bars. "The Sword of Kalia isn't real. It's a weapon from a video game." Specifically, it was one of the best swords from Battle Knights, an online game the boys played all the time. "Yep," Hank said, "and I found it while I was playing last night." "What?" Gus said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I just did," Hank said. "But if you want it, I will give it to you for free." "Seriously?" Gus said. "That sword is worth, like, 2,000 gold, probably." "That's right," Hank said. "That should show you how serious I am about getting into that cellar tomorrow." Gus couldn't say no. He tried for a minute. He knew how much trouble he could get into. These schemes of Hank's never ended well. The last time he helped Hank with one of his plans, they both ended up in detention, stapling 4,000 handouts for a 3rd grade class. It took 2 weeks of staying after school. But he wanted the Sword of Kalia. With that sword, he could defeat every other player in the game, and every monster in every dungeon. How could he say no? Gus put out his hand. "Deal," he said, and he and Hank shook on it. Gus began to regret it right away. Chapter 3. Forming a Plan. The mayor's assistant, Hubert Pommel, greeted the class at City Hall the next day. "If you children will follow me," he said after pointing out the exits and restrooms, "we will begin our tour in the meeting hall." Ms. Freckle clapped her hands twice, very quickly. The sharp sound echoed through City Hall's marble entryway. Chop, chop, she said. Follow Mr. Pommel, children. The class fell into two single-file lines, marching side by side behind Mr. Pommel. Ms. Freckle walked behind them. Ms. Freckle was a strict lady. She was one of the strictest teachers in school. Gus knew she was just watching out for them, and that she wanted the best for them. But sometimes it got pretty annoying to have to follow her directions all the time, and act like you were in the army or something. Gus and Hank made sure to get in different lines toward the middle, so they could talk without Ms. Freckle or Mr. Pommel overhearing. "Have you decided how to distract Ms. Freckle yet?" Hank whispered. Gus nodded once.